So I've supervised as the main advisor 115 dissertations.
In today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing an economics legend in the economics of health, Dr. Michael Grossman. Mike is an emeritus professor of economics at City University of New York's Graduate Center, where he spent nearly his entire career studying the economics of health, as well as mentoring many future health economists. His influence on the field is difficult to overstate. One of the core economic models, for instance, of the demand for health is the Grossman model. Written under the supervision of Nobel laureate Gary Becker while he was a PhD student at Columbia University in the late 60s. He would go on to write countless peer-reviewed publications amounting somewhere between 30 and 40,000 citations over what, by any measure, has been an incredibly impactful career as an economist. This interview was, though, also personally meaningful for me, as I've been a longtime admirer of the type of scientist and the type of economist that I would like to be. Mike embodies many elements that I admire. He is a careful researcher, meticulous, thoughtful. He is a devoted teacher and mentor to students. He is also a community organizer. He ran the National Bureau of Economic Research Health Economics Group for decades, which served as a foundation for the distribution and the creation of new and the promotion of new research. I so enjoyed our meeting that I decided I wanted to do a multi-part interview series with him so that I can better understand these different parts of him as well as his career. This is part one of an open-ended series on Michael Grossman. I am Scott Cunningham, and this is Mixtape, the podcast. Okay, well, it's my pleasure to have a chance to meet with one of my favorite health economists or economists in general in the profession, Michael Grossman. Thanks so much for giving me some of your time to talk.
Well, thanks for asking me.
So I wanted, before we start talking about your career as an economist, I have some questions here. I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about growing up. Where'd you grow up as a kid?
All right, so I'm a native New Yorker, and aside from the 2 years I worked at the University of Chicago and the 4 years I went to undergraduate college at Trinity College in Hartford, I've lived in New York all my life.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and well, I actually lived in Fort Lee, New Jersey for about 18 years, but that's not very far from New York, and that isn't when I was a kid. So I was born in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
And I lived there for the first 7 years of my life. And then we moved to Queens, and we moved to a part of Queens that's a section called the Rockaways. Rockaways is a peninsula, and it's actually part of Long Island. Most of Long Island is not part of New York City, but there's this 10-mile area called the Rockaways, which is the tip western end of Long Island. So it's actually part of Long Island, which is obviously not a peninsula, it's an island. But this part of it is surrounded on two sides by the Atlantic Ocean, the third side by the Jamaica Bay. And then there is a part of it that is connected by land to the rest of Long Island, which is an island. But right on the Atlantic Ocean, and you really never know that you're in New York City when you're there, because the houses, is a second, and then there are all sections within this area. And I lived on the very tip western end in a section called the Ponset, which is an old Indian name. And that is zoned for private houses.
Okay.
The houses don't have a lot of land, but they're all single family houses. And I live like about 2 blocks from the Atlantic Ocean. And I spent a lot of time on the beach when I was a kid. And at that time, which was the 1950s, it wasn't that well known how bad the sun could be for you.
Oh,
So
gosh.
paying the price of all the time I spent on the beach with a number of skin cancers.
Oh, you have that now? You have some skin cancer now?
One of which have been serious. I don't have melanomas, but I've had squamous and basal skin cancer.
Okay.
And actually, for a couple of summers, I worked in a playground, which was right off of the beach.
Yeah.
And other summers, I just spend a lot of time on the beach, hanging out and going swimming.
Yeah. How did you end up at Trinity College? Do you not think about going to a school in New York City?
Well, I had the option. So New York City high schools had a policy there. So I went to a big New York City high school called Far Rockaway High School, which is in the Rockaways, but it's in a different area in the Rockaways, about 8-9 miles from where I live. It's the other end of the Rockaways. And the guidance counselor would allow students to make applications to 3 out-of-town colleges and only 3, and then to a CUNY college.
Okay.
So I did apply to Brooklyn College, which at that time was the best of the senior colleges within the UNY. It isn't anymore, but it was then. And also was the nearest one to where I lived. And then most of my parents were middle class, and they had enough money to send kids. I have 2 younger brothers, and they all went to colleges that were not in New York. And most of my friends did that also. Almost all did it. But I was only limited to 3 applications. So I made one to Cornell, and one to Dartmouth, and one to Trinity, which was my safe school. And at that time, it was sort of at the bottom of the top 25 to 30 liberal arts colleges, and now it's probably not ranked as high as it was then. And it was founded by the Episcopalian Church, and I'm obviously not Episcopalian. I'm Jewish, but it was mixed. There are about 10% Jews. It was all men.
Oh, it was when you were there. Is it still all men?
No. It
Okay.
went co-ed a long time ago. In fact, there's a funny story about that, an interesting story. If you'd like to hear it, it pertains to a guy named Haji Mojan. You know Haji Mojan or of him?
I don't think I know.
Haji Mojan. He's a Louisiana State University. He's an MB or research associate.
Oh yeah. I know him. Yeah.
He's from Turkey.
Yeah.
So he has a PhD from the Graduate Center.
Yeah.
He wrote a dissertation for me, and now his salary is about 2 times the salary I maxed out at. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's a lot more than I ever made.
He's been so successful.
And he was a first-year student. He gave me this theoretical paper about the economics of marriage. and
Oh,
it looked interesting. It was just something he did on his own, and I
oh,
to him, Haji, this is a real interesting paper, but I'm an empirical economist, and there's something missing from it. There's empirical work. So after this, so during the second year, he gave me a revised version, which had a lot of interesting empirical work.
oh,
And he wasn't married at the time. And I told him, there's still something missing.
yeah.
So I told him that I would go out and search for what was missing. And then I met the first woman who I ever met who had a BA from Trinity.
Uh-huh.
And she was a woman named Adeline Portiches. Portiche. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. She was Italian from Hoboken, and she
Uh-huh.
worked with my wife. And she wasn't going with anybody either at the time. And Archie knew the owners of a small Turkish restaurant in a town in New Jersey called Cliffside Park.
Uh-huh.
And he had arranged the MBR New York office, which was small. Haji took over the whole restaurant, and most of the people who worked in the office were going to go. And he had taught Turkish folk dancing in Turkey, and there was a band, and he was going to teach everybody how to Turkish folk. So I asked him. I told him that I had met Madeline. I really liked her, and I asked him if I could invite her, and he
Uh-huh.
said yes. And they started to date, and they got married. So I
Yeah.
found what was missing from the tape,
Is
and
that what you did?
I was the best man at the.
Oh my God. Is that what people expect now? This is like all the future students. They were like, if I work with Dr. Grossman, maybe he'll help me get married. And
Well, that's not the only story like that. But there was another guy who wrote a dissertation for me, and my wife's mother, when he was a student, was working in a small women's clothing store,
uh-huh.
and the manager of the store was a woman, and she wasn't dating anybody. So Eileen, my wife, and I made a party at our apartment for some of my friends, some of her friends. So this guy came, and he's a guy whose name you couldn't because he didn't end up being an academic economist. So he came, and the manager of the store came, and they met, and they got married.
Mm,
But they also got divorced ultimately, although they have two kids, and they were married for a long time.
mm.
So that's not the only show. And then it was a third couple. And again, you wouldn't owe either of these people because they haven't had academic careers. I didn't introduce them to each other. They were both PhD candidates in economics at the graduate center, but I hired both of them as research assistants.
Okay.
They added the bureau. The guy was 2 years ahead of the woman, and they got married. And I was also the best man at that.
Yeah.
So,
How many students have you had? How many dissertations have you advised?
all right, so that's something. I mean, the publications don't mean as much to me as the number of dissertations that
I
I've supervised. So I count those, and
I
my
I
students.
I have noticed that about you. I have noticed for a long time. I have a theory about you, which is you're a important part you are an example. You're like the best example of anybody I know who is producing science along two margins. One is writing these very impactful papers, and then two, actually three margins. One, the publishing, but then two, the mentoring is just unbelievable how many people you have produced, you've played a role in. And then related to that, I also kind of feel like connected to that is you run in the NBR, the National Bureau of Economic Research health economics program for, decades. Almost it's like you're this example of the scientific model that people don't really always know about, which is through this production of people and through the mentoring and also the platform of the group, the health group.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. But there were some elements to that was sort of random luck. So the answer in terms of the number. So I've supervised as the main advisor, 115 dissertations.
Oh my gosh.
Then I've served on another 180 now, something almost around 180 committees as a second or third reader. So the rules at the Graduate Center is that each dissertation has to have a supervisor, and then it has to have at least two additional members who are also members of the doctoral faculty in economics of CUNY. And then it could have more than that, and it could also have outside readers, people who want UNY. But the reason I've done so many goes back to the year that I was hired there. I taught at the CUNY Graduate Center from 1972 through 2017. And the first 2 years I was a visitor, and then I got a tenure track appointment.
Okay.
And the way the PhDs work at CUNY, or the way that the faculty works, is there are two types of faculty. There are central appointments who do all their teaching at the Graduate Center, and that's where they have tenure. And then there are college-based faculty, people who teach at the senior colleges, Hunter, City, Brooklyn, Queens, Peru, and they have tenure there, and they do and they're also on the doctoral faculty in economics. Some of them teach a course a year, some of them teach a course a semester, but that's rare. They typically, some will teach a course a year, some will teach a course every other year, some will do very little teaching but will serve on dissertation committees, and some don't do anything.
Right.
So, and I was hired. There had been a period of time in the previous 3 years when there had been 6 central appointments, and 5 of them were in the labor human capital area. Mm-hmm. And these are, I think, are old enough to know most of these guys because they're pretty well known. Finest Welsh.
Yeah.
Finest Welsh are of them.
Mm-hmm. He started Stata and started Stata, and then did a lot of labor stuff.
Yeah, so he passed away a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. So Finest Welsh taught there for 3 years. He actually hired, and Bob Willis. Bob Willis?
Yeah. I haven't thought of him in a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was there for 3 years. Jim Smith, Jim Smith, the
No, I
guy,
don't know him.
and see, someday that's what people are going to say. Somebody's going to mention my name and they're going to say, who the hell is he?
The well,
He, he's a Chicago PhD who spent most of his career at the Rand
oh,
Corporation,
okay, okay.
and he did a lot of work with the health and retirement survey now. So he was an able economist to start off with. He wrote a dissertation. He's a couple of years younger than me. He left Rand, but fairly recently. So, and he was a guy who really didn't like teaching that much. So he spent his whole career at Rand.
Mm.
And so he was there for 3 years. Bill Landis,
Yeah,
he's the founding editor of the Journal of Law and Economics.
yeah.
He was there for 3 years. And,
Okay.
and this guy was a guy named Melvin Rader, who was,
Don't know him.
you don't know him. Yeah, well, he was first, he was one of the first economists who took labor economics seriously.
Mm.
And he taught at Stanford for a long time. And then I guess his kids were out of the house, and he and his wife decided that they'd like to live in New York. So he spent 3 years at the grad center. So there were those five guys, and they all had central appointments. So the thing, the economics program was dominated by labor, human capital, human resources. All these guys were NBR research associates.
Yeah.
At that time, the NBR had a single office. There was no Cambridge office. They had a single office on Addison Avenue and 39th Street.
Uh-huh.
And the Graduate Center at that time had an office was in an old office building that was on 42nd Street between Fifth Avenue and 6th Avenue. So they were very near each other. And Victor Fuchs was there. He was there. Now, he had a joint appointment. He was at the Graduate Center and the Mount Sinai School of Medicine, which at that time was part of CUNY, and now it isn't. So he was there, and then Harry Chiswick, who's his name. So he wasn't a central appointment, but he was teaching at Queens College, and he was on the doctoral faculty in economics, and he did a little some teaching there as well. All these guys taught there for 3 years.
3 years.
And that's all. And Victor actually, Victor actually taught there a little bit more than 3 years. But they all left in the fall of 1974. And I started to teach there on a tenure track line. And there was a situation where students had taken courses with these people, and their aim was to do dissertations with them, and some of them had actually started dissertations, and they all left.
But they're all leaving. They're all temporary. So
yeah. No, but they weren't really temporary. These guys were tenured. They were tenured. Well, Smith might not have been tenured, and Willis might not have been tenured because they were very young. But they were on tenured lines. The other people were tenured, and they were there for 3 years, and they all got better office. And the other reason they left was the NBER in the fall of 19, so well, yeah, just in the fall of 1974, opened a second office. And this is not, I don't know how well known this is, but they opened up this office on the Stanford campus. So up until 2008, the NBR had an office in Stanford.
Okay.
Right on the Stanford campus. That AB is not all that well known. It's certainly well known among people my age. And that's why Victor left.
Oh, that's why he left.
Yeah, and the story about that is some anonymous donor had given Stanford money with the purpose of building an office for the bureau. But they didn't want to do it until they got people to commit to go. So Victor was a native New Yorker. He had spent all his life in New York, and in the academic year 1972-73, he had a fellowship at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. And so he lived in California, and he decided that he really liked California.
Yeah.
So it was the opposite of if they build it. So yeah, it was. So if they build it, he will come. So they built it. So he made a commitment to go.
Yeah.
And he was at the Bureau and he was at Stanford and he had a joint appointment. He still does. He's actually still alive and he's 98. And he's still working.
Wow.
How
old is Victor Fuchs?
98.
He's 98 years old?
Yes.
Wow.
98 years old.
Hey, so this is funny. When I was in graduate school, I remember this paper coming out, and I don't remember where it was now though, but it's like the paper came out and it was like this Mike Grossman versus Victor Fuchs on whether or not the health capital models predictions about schooling's effect on health was causal or selection. And it was like the model claimed it was causal, and Victor had always been very skeptical and thought it was selection. I was curious, like, can you tell me a little bit about that background?
Yeah, well, it was he had this his argument was that it was that the real thing that was causing both health and schooling was time preference. That it was like a third variable argument that people who decide to get more schooling either for themselves or for their kids, and also decide to do things to get better health for themselves and or for their kids, are more future oriented. And that was the third variable, and he had a couple of papers that tried to show that. But that's really where there's a whole stack of research on it, and some people make that argument. Some people that argue that the causality goes in the other direction, that healthier people have longer lives, and for that reason they have more incentives to invest in their own schooling, or people who are healthier when they're young are sort of or out of schooling. They don't miss as many days of school. They just learn it, and they end up with more with more schooling.
Yeah.
And that hypothesis, or that issue of whether schooling really causes health, has really generated an awful lot of research in health economics.
Yeah.
And there are papers every year. Some of them try to hold constant as many third variables as they can. So some of them actually do IV models, and I'm sure you've seen these papers where they use compulsory school reform as an instrument for schooling. I like to, and there are papers every year on this. I like to say that in some years, the number of papers that support my argument that there really is a causal effect, there may be a sort of like my batting average in the Northeast veterans of foreign war competition in 1955, I think, where my batting average was 500. Means I had a hit. So I was up 2 times and I did at a hit. Other years, the percentage of papers that support causality is much more like my batting average during the regular season, which was 154. So sometimes I win a lot, sometimes I don't. But that really was the origins. He was really the first person, I think, to really raise the issue of whether it really was a causal effect. And I took it seriously, and so did a lot of other people. Although he actually, even way before that, after I finished my dissertation, so I think I'm through. I mean, Eileen's not here. He always says I really talk too much, and I had to get to the point. But the point of why I've done all this dissertation supervision really goes back to after I was hired at the center. There really were ever more than 3 central appointments in almost all the years that I taught there. So I not only was on health dissertations, but I was on labor dissertations. I was actually a second or third reader on dissertations in macroeconomics, and the last macroeconomics course I took was when I was an undergraduate, and I was a PhD candidate at Columbia. It was possible to get a PhD in economics without taking any macroeconomics, which is exactly what I did. But
that's a lot of economists' dream. That's a microeconomist utopia for some people.
Well, that was a reality, and now it's not like that anymore. But in my time, it was. So sometimes, it was really hard to get people to serve on dissertation committees, and I did teach with a real good macroeconomist who you probably wouldn't know. His name was Salih Efci, and he was from Turkey. He was a student of Sims and Sargent when they both taught in Minnesota. And he was a very, very good time series macroeconometrician who also got interested in finance and later in later stages. He was not as old as me and passed away, and he was only about 62. but he taught with me at the center, and I would sign the pieces of paper for his macro and finance dissertations that they were all right, and he would sign them for my health economics dissertations. And but he was actually to give sensible comments because he was in econometrics. Every once in a while, I made a sensible comment on a macro dissertation, but I think it was fairly rare. So that's why I particularly why I was a second or third reader on a lot of dissertations that were not in health.
Right.
So that's my story about supervising dissertation, and I do get a lot. I mean, I actually still do it. CUNY rules prohibit emeritus faculty from supervising dissertations, and they wouldn't pay me if the rules allowed it, but they do allow them to serve on committees. So I still do that.
I see.
I still do that. And,
yeah. I mean, you're a true you're a true you're the full package for an economist. I mean, just in terms of the teaching and the mentorship and the scientific personal output, and then the running of these this workshop at MBER. I want to talk about all of it, but I don't want to lose thread on Columbia. And so I was wanting to know a little bit about that time there, because in some ways I know you're such a humble person and you're not going to like me saying this, but I think you're probably like Becker's most accomplished economist. I mean, to a lot of people, that it's just the work that you had in health is just, it's just hard to find someone else that came out of that Becker worldview that just was so impactful. And I don't mean that to kind of downplay your own creative work, but it's just the connection with Dr. Becker is just so interesting. And I was just kind of curious what it was like being there with him and what you learned from him.
All right, well, so let me tell you the easiest way to answer that is to talk about the history of how I started to work on the demand for health, because that really sums it all up. And it also highlights that what you said about me is not really right. But let me tell you the story. Well, the story. So the story is, it's June of 1966, and I had finished my first 2 years at Columbia, and I had passed all the exams, and I didn't have a dissertation topic, and I was thinking of getting married.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there were full-time people at the MBR, and now there aren't any, but there were then. Victor was full-time.
Okay.
Becker was a research associate, but he taught at Columbia. Jacob Minster, who also was very instrumental in the dissertation and the labor economics work that Becker was doing at Columbia. I'm not going to answer that. He was also a research associate. Should I just turn it off?
Yeah, we can pause it real quick, and then you could go do that. Okay.
All right. So anyhow, Victor was looking for a research assistant, and Becker recommended me to him, and he hired me. And I really was looking for some income for the summer. And he was doing a book on the service sector of the U.S. economy, and that's how he got interested in health and health economics. Victor, because at that time health still was a fairly big part of the economy. So I worked on that book for him, or the part of it, for the summer. And at the end of the summer, he makes me this offer that if I did a dissertation in health economics, I could stay at the Bureau, work for him half time, and have space to do office space to work on my dissertation the other half of the time. And at that time, I didn't know anything about health economics. There were no courses in health economics at Columbia. There were hardly any courses anywhere in health economics. So it was a very, very new field. There really wasn't even a field. There were no ads for health economists that I ever saw at that time.
Yeah.
And so I decided to take his offers. So I started to work for him in June. Eileen and I got married in September, and that's why I always like to say that I have two wives, and I've been married to each of them for 56 years, or almost 56. 56 for Eileen in September.
Uh-huh.
So then the issue was that I really wanted to write a dissertation for Gary, but I didn't have a topic. And I went to him and talked to him, and he was out doing work at health. It had now worked in health at that time, so he wasn't sure that he was going to supervise me. So I was still looking around for a topic and reading stuff in health. And then it was a paper that had been done by Irving Levison, Richard Auster, and Everett Sarachek. Irv was Vic's main research assistant at the NBR at the time, and he was also a PhD candidate at Columbia. And he was doing a dissertation from INSER. He had actually started his dissertation. He was a couple years ahead of me, and he was doing a dissertation dealing with the self-employed. And it was I don't exactly remember what it was, but it was dealing with self-employment, health. And Victor, and he worked for Victor full time. Auster was a PhD candidate at MIT, and he was an native New Yorker, and he was around the Bureau, maybe just as a visiting student. I don't remember exactly whether he worked for Victor or not. He certainly interacted with them. Everett Sarachek was not a PhD candidate anywhere. She had a master's and she worked for Victor full time. And Victor had on a paper, this great unpublished paper, and it really is a great paper, dealing with some of the determinants of variations in mortality rates among states of the U.S. And this is now he actually finished the paper in 1965. So it's way before there were time series of state cross sections. So we had basically a single cross section, and he found some interesting effects. He found a negative effect of education on mortality. He actually found a positive effect of income on mortality, which was kind of puzzling. And then he had some health inputs, the number of physicians per capita and things like that. And it really had some interesting empirical findings, but he didn't want to publish it because he was concerned about the reverse causality, not income and health so much as the inputs, the medical care inputs and health incomes, that MDs might okay in areas where health is maybe better, might be worse to start off with. So there's a real causality issue.
Yeah.
But Irvin and his two colleagues picked that up, and they did a paper where they treated the inputs as endogenous. So it was a two-stage least squares paper. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to issue it as an NBO working paper, and it was not the current NBO working paper series. That didn't start until around 1971 or 72. These were papers that staff wanted to either try to publish in journals or submit them maybe to books as book chapters, or put it or do something like that. And these papers had to be okayed by your reading committee of NBO Research Association. So Becker was on the reading committee. So he reads this paper, and he was concerned about the lack of a theoretical framework, and that it really didn't distinguish. It really just, that's when he was, and he said health should be treated as an object that enters the utility function of consumers.
Becker says that?
Yeah, he says that. And he also says at health does not only depend on medical care, there's a whole production function with a lot of inputs in it. And that's right after, so he published his paper on the theory of the allocation of time in 1964. And that had this household production function model in it, that consumers actually produce their objects of choice with inputs, medical care, their own time, diet, exercise. So he said that, so that really concerned him. So he gave me that report and said, this is an idea for a dissertation. And he had in the production function, he put education into the production function. So the original, his original proposal was to focus on the effects of education on health. But as I started to work on it, he sort of suggested. Some people say that's what he did. Some people said that he probably demanded to make it into to really have a theoretical framework and to really develop it in more detail. So it was his idea to view health as an object of choice in the utility function and to use the aspects of the household production function model. But then he also said health is a form of human capital.
Yeah.
He is focused on knowledge, but I like to call him knowledge capital, but is commonly referred to as education. He also had done stuff on the job training.
Can you just real quick tell me what Gary Becker, when he said, for people that are listening, when people hear human capital, they may not immediately see what, college education and health would have to do with each other. It has to do with it has to do with how he thinks about that phrase, right? What does he mean by that?
Well, he meant that both of them are determinants of earnings.
Right.
And but he also suggested making a distinction that at education on knowledge capital affects a person's wage rate, affects his market productivity. Health also might do that, but in the fundamental, but it does something that's more fundamental. It basically has an impact on the amount of time a person has to allocate to market work and also to on-market activities, and it has an impact on the amount of time a person is going to live.
Yeah.
So the distinction that I emphasized, but that he suggested, was that health can be viewed. Health is a part of human capital, but it differs from knowledge capital in the sense that knowledge capital impacts the wage, health capital impacts available time, length of life. So that was his distinction. So again, to say that I, get and see, the thing where I got there, I was really lucky, and where I got more recognition than I thought I deserved was at the time that I did that work, and at the time that my NBR monograph was published in 1972, and my paper in the Journal of Political Economy was published the same year. He had now worked in health. So it looked like all of it was due to me, and it really was not. Part of it was due to Victor, who really urged me to work in health to start off with. And the other part of it, and more of it, was due to Gary, because they really were his ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I carried them out. And so other people who wrote dissertations for him, maybe didn't get as much recognition as I got, because I was doing something at least at face value, looked somewhat different from the type of work that
he was doing.
And he was doing, and let me give you an example and give some recognition to a guy who I thought the best student in my cohort, and it's a guy you probably would not have heard of. His name was Gilbert Guez, EHEZ. Yeah. So he he wrote a dissertation on the theory which dealt with the theory of the allocation of goods and time over the life cycle.
Mm.
And he and Gary published an NBR book on that topic in around 1975 or so. And it's a very good book. It's on the Bureau website. I'll give you the site. I'll give you the reference to it. And Gill's first job was at the University of Chicago. In fact, he and Isaac Ehrlich.
Yeah.
You know of Isaac Ehrlich?
Yeah.
So he all started at the University of Chicago in the fall of 1969. Gill was in the economics department. Isaac was in the business school. So they had a tenure track appointment, and Gill had, and I had this on tenure track appointment at the Center for Health Administration Studies as a research associate. And at that time, the center was part of the business school, and now it's part of the School of Social Work.
Oh, yeah.
And or social welfare. I don't know.
Yeah, that's where Harold Pollack is, I think.
Right? Yeah, that's right. But then it was part of the business school, and in fact, then at that time, Chicago offered an MBA in hospital administration, and they don't offer that anymore. So a number of people at the center taught in the business school in this MBA. And the second year I was there, I did some teaching in the business school, but I just taught a microeconomics course for MBA students. So Gill had the best appointment, and Gill came up with the topic for his dissertation independently of Gary.
Oh.
And the reason that they published together is Gary was focusing on the allocation of time over a life cycle, whereas Gill was focusing on the allocation of goods over a life cycle. And the main argument was that as age is that the typical age pattern is the ages would rise over the working life and then maybe start to fall at the end. But in periods when age rates were relatively high, people would substitute goods for time in the production of household commodities. So that was the basic idea, and they did test it out, and they decided to publish together because Gill's work was so related to Gary's work. But Gill came up with that topic on his own, and he really never got the recognition that he deserved. And his issue, and the reason why you probably don't know his name, is that he was a very critical person. And he was self-critical. And for that reason, he had a lot of difficulty publishing.
I see.
So he never published all that much. He did publish this book, and he had a couple of other things, but he didn't get tenure at Chicago. And he spent all of his career living in Chicago. He taught at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and he taught at Roosevelt University in Chicago.
I see.
And he was a couple of years older than me, but he passed away. He passed away maybe about 5 years ago.
Okay.
His daughter, Andrea Ghez, won the Nobel Prize in Physics about 2 years ago.
What did?
His oldest daughter won the Nobel Prize in Physics
Oh, wow.
2 years ago. She teaches at the University of California, Los Angeles. And I obviously knew her. And I sent her a message. I congratulated her. And by then, Hill had passed away, and I told her that I know he would have been so proud of you.
Yeah.
She said that he really emphasized to her the importance of mathematics.
Huh.
Yeah, he had three daughters. So Andrea went to MIT, and his middle daughter went to Harvard, and his youngest daughter went to MIT. So they shows you how smart.
They sound amazing. They sound amazing.
And
that's neat.
Yeah.
Mike, I was wondering, what if we were to do a series of interviews where I could learn more about you doing these kinds of podcasts, and it would be like, this might be something that we could do again.
Sure, that's okay. Hey, with me, because I guess I talk too much about.
No, you didn't. You didn't at all. I have so much. I just want to keep doing it. I think it would be a lot of fun to learn as much about. There's just so much about the history of health and your time with Gary Becker, but also just even want to talk at length about NBER. I had sort of bracketed off that I thought that would be something fun, and maybe it would be something we could do, just sort of a small little series on you.
Sure, that's all right. I think, things like this make me a little uncomfortable because I'm just uncomfortable, and it's not because of my speech, it's because I first rule of research is add publicity is better than no publicity. My second rule is ever take yourself too serious. And my third rule maybe is a little bit more serious in that it's sort of better to be the first or one of the first, even if you're wrong. But I'm not a publicity hound, and
of course, no. You're such a humble man, and so just unbelievably friendly and socially supportive of other economists. I know that I can tell that you don't want to promote yourself, and I'm not meaning it like that. But I also kind of think you're sort of a special, you sort of have you have the ability to tell parts of the story of microeconomics, the latter part of 20th century microeconomics in the United States, that I actually kind of think is people would find really useful, and a lot of students I think also just would love to learn more about how the field, just kind of what you saw the field changing, what your part of it was. And I also just think it would be just a lot of fun to hear your story. Just if it's something we could continue to do.
Sure, that's okay. Yeah, that's fine with me. There are things that I think that you did want to ask me that you didn't have time to because I talked too much, and I got
no. We talked about exactly what we were supposed to talk about. So, well, let me wrap this up. Thank you so much, and I'll appreciate you giving me your time.
Sure. Okay, Scott.